Namaste.
Namaste.
Familiar with the term bro? Like some men call other
Hey, bro.
hey bro.
Bro.
And some people make fun of that. And I try not to make fun of what people call other people, as long as it's a term of endearment, and not like, hey schmuck.
That's what you call me.
Yeah.
That's your personal terms of endearment.
Yeah, right. So, but I was confused last night when I was giving some people a ride, and they were from Chicago, and they were telling me this story. It was a couple, and they were up here for their anniversary because they were explaining that when your anniversary is on St. Patty's Day weekend, you don't want to be in Chicago because it's just, you try and go out and have a nice meal, and somebody throws up around you, and it's just way too hectic and chaotic, so they tend to come to Milwaukee, because even though it's St. Patty's Day weekend, it's not quite as intense. And then they were just talking about the neighborhood they lived in, and that he said, we lived in a building with some finance bros. And I admit, I I thought, well, is he trying to be funny? Should I laugh? Is he serious? Is he a finance bro? And I didn't know what to do, so I just said, oh. And it was being mindful on purpose, but it wasn't helping. So he kept on with the story. The two of them did. About one Halloween, the finance bros were in the apartment above them were having a party, and this couple was getting ready to go to bed, and they thought, how nice, it's starting to rain, and they heard the rain like hitting their balcony patio door window, and they thought it was kind of odd that it wasn't hitting their other windows.
Oh, somebody was peeing.
And they looked out the window, and one of the finance bros was wearing a dog costume. Peeing off the porch.
Oh, yuck.
This is Chicago.
And they said, well, it probably was appropriate behavior for the costume.
Yeah.
Hitting their windows?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, he probably had, I didn't ask if he was lifting a leg or, how much in character he was.
Just glad he wasn't doing the other thing.
Yeah, that was probably next, but. And it struck me that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, mindfulness doesn't help. And the more you try and be mindful, the more you wish you had. And then I started thinking about today's gospel, which has really always been problematic for me. This statement on the part of Jesus about, you'll always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me.
Yeah.
And unless you understand it as, some people really have a big problem with balance. And it's sort of like, well, I have $20 and I haven't eaten today. So I could put $20 in the church poor box, or I could eat. And you maybe could justify, in my mind, putting the $20 in the church poor box if you knew that putting that $20 in the church poor box was going to eliminate poverty for all time. But since you can't guarantee that, in fact you can pretty much guarantee it's not, you'd probably be better off getting something to eat so that you could continue your work fighting poverty the next day. And I think that's what the root of this message is. Whether or not this perfume is used, or whether it's sold and the money given to the poor, there's still going to be this problem poverty. And I think we also need to dissect the fact that Judas is getting a bad rap here after the fact. I don't think Judas was dipping into the poor purse and stealing the money. I think this is a lot of 60 years later PR. But I think the disciples do have a mindfulness problem. And I think the biggest mindfulness, the one with the, that was gonna be a horrific sentence. The one with the biggest mindfulness problem was Peter. Because Peter rushes in where angels fear to tread. Peter sees something. We just die out there.
It just jumps right in.
Yeah. Can you see the camera still going? I just heard a funny noise.
Okay,
I'll keep going.
you can go ahead.
Peter rushes in where angels fear to tread.
That was such a great line, it has to be caught.
Yeah. And you see it, we saw it a couple of weeks ago at the Transfiguration. You can come back now. I'm not casting you out. I'm sorry, I'm distractible today. Come on in, sit
Are you
down.
being mindful?
I am mindful of everything. It's diffuse, objectless awareness. So Peter comes across Jesus and Moses and Elijah, and he doesn't just sit there and kind of take it all in. He goes, I know, we'll build 3 shelters. And it's like, no. What happens? Moses and Elijah disappear. God comes and goes, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased. And Peter goes off. Jesus is walking on the water. Peter goes, let me do it too, let me do it too. You know? Jumps in the water, sinks. I mean, yeah,
Yes.
it's never that Peter sits there and goes, I'm going to watch what's going on here for a minute and kind of take this in and consider what it might be. No, it's Peter's going to jump right in. Peter is impulsive as the day is long. And would Peter have been a little more mindful? He maybe would have had a little better success rate in terms of what he was trying to do. Now, we can assume if what we hear about him in the book of Acts and later on is true, he kind of shook that out. He got it resolved at some point. But it's probably part of all of us that we want to jump right in and do it right. And particularly in the 21st century, in our educational system, we're trained to do that. You know, who's going to answer the question? Teacher's going to ask a question, and Horshack's going to raise his hand and go, oh, right? And nobody, practically speaking, is rewarded for reflecting on their answer. And then we wonder why we have a fair number of people who just fire away with reckless answers and make pretty significant fools of themselves on a pretty regular basis. So this morning, I opened my Facebook feed, and I don't quite remember where it was. It's just, well, I kind of sort of do, but I'm not going to say. In one of the mainline denominations, they have a new bishop in their area. And the person who was announcing this said how wonderful it was that they had a new bishop because their area is diverse in many ways, ethnically, economically, every way you could imagine. It was rather large and highly populated, and when the bishop made his little tour when they were deciding who to choose, he was obviously a good administrator.
Okay.
There's no confusion.
Well, I think they wanted a finance bro. And
Hopefully not one in a dog suit.
well, it might be in a dog suit. Or they wanted a bishop and they chose a finance bro. Or they wanted a finance bro instead of a bishop. But nobody bothered to ask, what do we need? They had this idea. Because one of the things that I did, and I'm not saying I'm perfect or the answers I got were perfect, but when it became clear that I was going to be the presiding bishop of this church, I went around to all the pastors I knew in the area, and I said, if you could have one thing from your bishop that you aren't getting, what is it? What would it be? And they did not say, I wish he, she, or it was more of a finance bro. They said, I wish they were a pastoral presence. And when I went, and I also went to people who were members of churches that had bishops, and I said, what do you wish you could have from your bishop or bishop equivalent? You know, if they called them something else, but they filled the same role. Nobody said a finance pro. They said a pastoral leader. And I would suggest that leadership in churches believe that they need finance pros. When you could go to any school that offers a master's in business administration and hire a great finance pro and put them to work in your church. But you wouldn't have to make them a bishop. And I know when your ship is a-sinking, you want to hold on to every last penny you can, because you don't know if another one's coming in. But the way to make sure that there aren't going to be many more coming in is to make a finance bro your bishop. Judas is worried, maybe because he knows if he really did turn Jesus over to the Pharisees and the Romans, and I have my doubts if he really did. But if he really did, he knows the leader isn't going to be around too much longer. So how are we going to sustain this thing? Or maybe he knew, just because the trajectory of events was pretty clear, that Jesus was walking down a pretty narrow path and that he was going to get himself killed. So of course he's saying, these are our assets. We can't just be turning this house into Sephora at the mall, where everybody who walks by is going to be choking for the smell of the perfume. And he panicked, and he missed the point. And it's human, it's what we do. But the only way to step out of that is to get in this practice of mindfulness, this practice of maybe even counting 3 before we respond. And not 1, 2, 3. But 1, and not out loud, or they'll put you away. But 1, 2, 3. And then decide if you have anything to say. Because, practice really does help. And if we don't have an answer, it's okay to say, let me think about that. And especially if we're become aware that we're on tenuous ground and we're not so sure about moving forward, it's the worst time in the world to make a decision. It's the worst time in the world because we're probably going to try and preserve and hold on and squeeze tight. And of course, if you squeeze anything really tight, it just worms out of your arms. And you see it in churches, you see it in businesses, you see it in relationships, you see it everywhere. You have to be able to hold loosely and let living things and living organizations breathe and trust that in the end, whatever happens, it'll be okay.